Okay.
Awesome.
Officially
Well,
recording.
yes. So we are so happy that you guys are here and thank you. We love if you have your camera on so we can see you and connect. If you can't, that's okay too. We know sometimes you're not in a place where you can have a camera on, but we are just happy to have you guys all here. We'll be going about 60 minutes most likely, and we will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So
In
we
fact,
want to
as much time as you want, honestly.
Yes, for sure. Yes. So we want to welcome you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Parenting, which is kind of our focus, is connecting with our kids. And we know that parenting it comes with incredible joy and it also could have some deep frustrations. And as a mom or a dad, we know that we want the very best for our kids and you want them to be happy and confident and resilient. But when you can be or feel stuck in your own pain, it can be really hard to know how to give them that best. And today we are going to go directly to the root cause of this frustration, which is your own wounds of grief, trauma, and loss. So healing these wounds forms the foundation it forms the foundation for creating what we're talking about, which is an emotionally healthy home, a home where your kids can thrive. And our gift to you for joining today is we have a Building an Emotionally Healthy Home ebook. So when we're done, we will send you an email. It'll have a link to the replay, and it will also have our ebook that we created, which we love.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Um, so this is kind of your map as we move into the next part of it. And so with all that in mind, this is what we're going to be kind of talking about today. In this presentation, you're going to discover how healing your own emotional wounds can transform your family. You're going to find out how to break free from generational cycles of pain and emotional disconnection that you may be experiencing. And most importantly, you'll have the tools to become the mom or dad your children need to feel safe and loved.
Yes. And we know that in today's world, many parents are watching their kids struggle, whether it's depression, anxiety, even self-destructive behaviors like cutting, drug use, these kinds of things. And when this happens, it's easy as a parent to feel overwhelmed. And we can even find ourselves feeling and questioning, like, what did I do wrong? Or how did it get to this point? And we want to share an important truth with you today that helping your children begins with healing yourself. It's so important. It's easy to focus on what's presenting or what's happening in them. And the truth is, all of the shift happens when you focus on your own deep wounds, because that is how you can show up in a different way and have connection in a different way.
Yeah, and that's obviously something that is tough for parents. I mean, for Vicky and myself, we've walked this path ourselves and we've experienced just an incredible sense of transformation in our own lives and also in our marriage, honestly. And in fact, because of that, we've spent the last 20 plus years helping others experience a similar transformation. Kind of like when you find something that's amazing, you want others to know about it. And so we're really committed to this and we love this idea of transformation. It's where, things, no matter how challenging or difficult they are right now, can be better. And so before we kind of dive into the meat of what we're going to go into, I just want to briefly introduce ourselves. Some of you guys know us, some of you don't. But we're Daniel and Vicky Hagedorn. And we are very, very acquainted with the pain and damage of unresolved grief. We know very well the frustration of self-sabotage and the heartache of broken relationships. But the good news is we also discovered a way out and a way to heal and grow and experience that transformation that I was talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Um, I thought it would be kind of cool, Dan, if you wanted to share a little bit about your background in your growing up.
Um, so I grew up and had a sort of normal childhood until about 8. When I was 8, my mom had a cardiac arrest. She had a bad heart, and so this wasn't an entirely unexpected event. But I was woken up about 2 in the morning. I had paramedics stomping through the house, and when my mom left, she was in a coma, which she would remain in for 3 weeks. My dad was about ready to pull the plug when she miraculously came out of it. And we thought, oh my gosh, wow, but the doctors also told us that whatever recovery she would experience would happen within the first year. And so, despite my best prayers, she was exactly the same. And so that left my dad and myself taking care of my mom. My mom was sort of a semi-vegetable. She could kind of walk, but needed to be helped. She could kind of eat on her own, but needed to be fed. She needed to be checked regularly so that she didn't, soil herself. And if she did, then I'm a child and I'm cleaning up my mom. So this was my experience growing up. And in the midst of that, my dad, he I didn't realize all of the stuff going on in my own dad's life, but it kind of illustrates, the pain that you don't deal with gets carried forward. And so for my dad, he grew up in the Depression. He had an alcoholic, abusive, drunk for a father. His stepfather was also an abusive alcoholic. And he started working at the age of 5. And then his eldest brother abandoned the family. His second eldest brother, who he idolized, who was a core of the family, he was in World War I in the Army playing basketball because he was a pretty gifted athlete. And I guess one of the players took exception to what he was doing through the basketball, the back of his head, and it just hit it in the right of the way, broke his neck, and he died. And so now my dad is experiencing all of this loss in a very, very, very short amount of time. I just share all that to share that this is the background of my dad's story that's going into my story now. And so, even though I had nothing to do with any of those events, I'm now living out the consequences of those events as he's taking out that frustration on me. And so, the abuse that was in our relationship was pretty severe. The middle school that I attended, they actually kind of got involved and said, look, we're going to report this if you don't keep your hands off your kid. And so it was bad, but um, the big turning point, came years later when I did grief recovery, and my dad and I, despite this really horrific relationship we had, was able to be repaired and restored. And I had 20 years of an amazing experience with my dad. And so, I mean, when I say amazing, I mean, I went from hating him intensely, like fantasizing about killing him for a couple of years. I don't know if you ever hated somebody that much, but um, I went from that to my dad had safe passage in my heart. I mean, every time I thought about my dad, I just thought about how much I loved him, cared about him. And so this was the power. So when I talk about transformation, I'm not just sort of throwing a word around. I'm not just sort of using that because it sounds good. I mean, it literally is the experience that I had through this process, and it transformed everything in my relationship with my dad. And that in turn, became kind of the impetus for what transformed the relationship that I would later enjoy with my daughter, because of the things that I was able to process and deal with. It didn't carry forward into my relationship with her. That's a very nutshell version of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
of the story, but yeah.
Yeah. And that is really awesome. And we feel like we have such a passion for fighting for families because we really feel like we've got to fight for these kids and the next generation to really break out of unhealthy coping, because we just learned these unhealthy ways to cope in order to survive. And that is what continues to get passed down. And so we really love what we get to do and how we get to work with people one on one in order to heal on those foundational levels. Which brings us to discovering the path to healing. This is so awesome. So, a little bit about my journey. Like many of you, I've carried wounds from my past, like wounds that I didn't even realize were really holding me back. There was a lot of painful cycles, feeling helpless to change, a lot of strained relationships, and I had a lot of patterns of addiction, codependency, self destruction, a lot, a lot, a lot. I spent thousands of dollars on therapy in my 20s and 30s. But everything did change when I discovered the grief recovery method, and it really was like a light in my life. I couldn't believe the transformation. I couldn't believe how much changed in 8 weeks and how different things were. And it really was like a light breaking through. And I felt like for the first time, I was able to confront deeply rooted things that were at the root and heal from them. And that allowed me to live a life where I was present. I was able to process my emotions in real time. And
Mm.
there was no even interest in using something to numb myself out anymore. It was amazing. And that's really what our hearts are for everyone, is to experience healing on this deep level. And I knew when I became a parent, I knew that I wanted to have better ways to connect and healthier ways to teach my daughter to process her life. She's going to have hard things. She's going to go through things. We talk about how what grief recovery is it gives you the tools to deal with all transition in life, everything. Every
Yeah.
transition is a grieving experience. And we wanted her to feel safe. We wanted her to feel heard. And I knew my daughter's not going to grow up in a home with alcoholism, eating disorders, like all of the ways that I had figured out how to process. I was not going to have that in my daughter's life. I
Yeah.
worked really hard not to do that. And the only way that I can provide that with her for her is to deal with my own. And that is my own triggers and heal in an emotionally healthy way, really for her and for me first, obviously, but to be able to pass that on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, through my own journey, I discovered something pretty profound, and that's true healing requires us to go deeper than we ever have before. Kind of like that old saying, if you want something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done. It's kind of like that. Because it's not enough to just slap a Band-Aid on this. We can't just, oh, we'll put a Band-Aid on the symptoms and then, think it's all good. We really have to go to the root cause, the unresolved grief that's festering in our hearts and has been that way for far too long, because grief just stacks if it's not processed. It doesn't go anywhere. And that's really what the grief recovery method does. It's not about quick fixes. It's not about surface level changes or behavior modification. It's really about diving deep, doing the hard work, and then coming out of the other side transformed. And I love this quote: your healing journey is the key to building a home full of connection and joy. And that's what this all leads to on the other side.
Yes. And so we talk about the big expectations and sometimes versus a harsh reality. And that can be the emotional challenges of parenthood. So we know that when we become parents, we start with great expectations. We picture ourselves raising happy, healthy children who will grow into thriving adults. And a lot of times they do, right? When our kids get older, but sometimes things don't work out the way we'd hoped. And when they struggle, we struggle. And suddenly we're not sure sometimes how we got here. And we can face feelings of guilt and shame, wondering, how did this happen? How are we here? How is my child struggling so much with fill in the blank, anxiety, depression? There is a litany of things right now that kids are struggling with. So we want you to know that no matter what, it's never too late. It's never too late. Not, it doesn't even matter how old your kids are. We're talking about young, preteen, all the way through. Because when you establish emotional safety in your home, then your kids will, what our goal is for them to invite you into their world as they get older, that they want your input, they want your advice, they want that connection. And you can't model something for them unless you've experienced yourself. You can't create something that isn't there.
Yeah, yeah, very true. And so really as parents, like I talked about earlier, we carry our own grief and trauma. We've got our own stuff that's completely independent of our kids. And
Yeah.
this stuff comes from our childhood, it comes from our past losses, and it can even come from the sometimes painful realities of parenting itself. The problem is, like I mentioned earlier, when that pain remains unresolved, it stacks. And then it doesn't just affect us, it starts to affect our entire family. Our kids can sense. They may not be able to name it, but they can sense when we are not fully present and engaged. They can sense when we are stuck in kind of survival mode, right? Versus really being with them. And the good news, I want to emphasize this. The good news is that healing your own heart is the first and most important step in creating that home where your kids can thrive emotionally. That's truly the root cause where it starts.
Yeah. And we know that as parents, we get plenty advice about parenting, what to say, how to set boundaries, how to handle your child's emotions. But all the expert advice in the world won't help you if you don't have the right tools to address the root of the issue. And that's what we love about this process. I've never known anything that addresses the root issue like grief recovery and like the process does. And it gives you really tools that are life changing, and they do help you heal from the inside out, because it's not about managing behavior, especially your kids' behavior or your own behavior or your spouse's behavior, right? It's not
Right.
about managing behavior. It's about transforming your emotional health. We always say that if you are a fruit producing tree and you have fruit in your life, whatever that fruit is, whether it's addiction, whether it's procrastination, like whatever those things are, you cannot change your fruit by pruning your tree. And a lot of times we do that. We do that by behavior modification. Focusing on the fruit is not the answer. You have to dig up the root of the tree and you have to plant in new seed, and then you will get new fruit. And it's really, really interesting because behavior is just a symptom of a deeper emotional issue. And typical behavior management techniques only actually create more disconnection from your child,
Yeah.
especially your teen or older adult children. Trying to, you know, focus on that behavior will never actually bring true healing and connection. And you can kind of say that the same thing about a spouse. You know, focusing on behavior or the way something is never really going to be what brings connection.
Yeah.
So all that'll do is leave you feeling resentful, unappreciated, misunderstood, and it'll make your kids feel not heard, not valued. They'll feel like they can't do anything right, and the disconnection just grows wider and wider. But
Yeah.
we're here to offer you encouragement. That's what we're here for. And your default does not have to be your destiny. The way that it's been doesn't have to be how it stays. Your core beliefs and old patterns can be rewritten. And that's thanks to an amazing thing called neuroplasticity. It will create a completely different response from you that will begin to establish trust and deep connection. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think along those points too, I was just going to throw in one more thing is if you think about using that tree analogy, when you prune a tree, all it does is grow back more of the same fruit.
Right.
And this is what leads to that cycle of frustration because you're modifying the behavior, i.e., trimming the tree back, but the result is you just get more of the fruit that you had before. And so that's why, we're always, I know we've kind of talked about it a couple different ways, but that's why we're always talking about going to the root of things because that's the only place where true change is possible. And so when you think about it, the truth is this, we're carrying our own unresolved grief. If we haven't processed it, we're carrying it. And as such, it's almost impossible to show up for our kids the way that we want to. If you think about it, it's just like if you were carrying around a 100-pound knapsack, it doesn't matter how good your intentions are or how strong your desire is, you still got 100 pounds on your back that you're having to lug around, you know? So we
Mhm.
just can't show up the way that we want to, the way that we'd like to. And what ends up happening is we're in survival mode. And all we do is we react to the struggles that are in front of us. We're crisis managing without ever really going down to, like I said earlier, the root cause of things. And that is where things go wrong for so many parents. But here's the thing, there is a way that things work. So there is a way to make these right. You have the power to stop this cycle, which is pretty awesome. I mean, like this isn't doom and gloom, like, well, here's what it is. You just got to deal with it. No, you don't. I mean, there's actually a way forward. There's a way through this to the other side. And it's never too early and it's never too late to make the change. And so what we're talking about here is really going in and dealing with and healing your own wounds so that you have space to connect to your kids. And this doesn't matter what age they are. They could be toddlers, preteens, teens, or even adults. This is about how you form and forge connections with them.
Yes. So there are 3 steps to a healthy and connected family. And so the grief recovery method really breaks this down, and it breaks it down into these 3 steps. First, we help you connect and confront your own grief and loss. These things that you've buried because life just keeps moving forward and there really isn't enough time ever to process. And we don't know how. We weren't taught how to process. And then we walk you through the process of healing the emotional wounds. And yes, you do have to stop and focus. And it's amazing. And it's your time to do that. It's so powerful. And then we'll show you how to convert your healing into a healthier and deeper connection with your kids, with your spouse, with your family. That's the whole goal. That is the goal. But it starts with you. It starts with converting your feelings and emotions in processing with the relationship that you have with yourself. So these 3 steps are really the foundation for creating an emotionally healthy home where everything thrives, your relationships thrive. Is everything perfect? Of course not. No, it isn't perfect. But communication is very different. Even if you're the only one that's doing this work, it's amazing how that happens because
Yeah.
you will show up differently. And it's really, really amazing. So even though it's another topic for another webinar, like we mentioned, it should be noted that it is a scientifically proven fact that the best thing you can do for your kids is to love your spouse and be obviously focused also on creating that harmony there. That kind of goes without saying, but that is a webinar all on its own is marriage
Yeah.
and relationship and communication and all of that, which
Yeah.
we've worked with many couples actually doing this work, and it has been amazing. When you have 2 willing people, it's incredible what can
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. So this is where the grief recovery method comes in. I can say that it's absolutely the best program I know of to help parents get to the root of their own struggles, to heal those deep wounds like we've talked about, and to ultimately create a healthier, happier home, right? We want to give our children a childhood that they draw strength from, that they draw inspiration from, not a childhood they have to recover from, right? So this is what this does. This is what I've seen it do in my own life, in Vicky's life, in our family. This isn't like, well, theoretically, I think this might really be a good thing. Like we've been able to live this. Our daughter's 20 now. We've been able to live this
Oh,
with her for 20 years. Well, almost 20. She'll be 20 in 6 more days. But this program is really about going past the surface, right? We're not interested in the surface stuff. We want to give you the actual tools to go to the heart of the issue so that you experience personal transformation and then through that impact your family. So this is what we are kind of excited to introduce to you. And that's the grief recovery method. We've talked about this. But this is a little bit more what it is. So it's an 8-week one-on-one Zoom coaching program where we will work together to help you heal from the wounds of your past, to break free from false limiting beliefs, and basically everything else that we've talked about so far. So we meet weekly on a 90-minute Zoom call, and then you'll have ongoing support throughout our 8 weeks together. And this is not just a program, it's literally a path to the healing and the transformation that you've been searching for. And so let me just take a moment to say that if you are here as one of our valued alumni, we would also love to invite you to the next step in the healing journey of the grief recovery, which is the alumni sessions. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment.
awesome. Yes. Yeah, that's fantastic. And it is so powerful. And what I love about these webinars is that we really get to show you how the process of grief recovery can apply in all these areas of your life. And so we want to help you experience this. So how can we do that? How can we help you do that? Because now that you've seen the potential for healing and transformation, we'd love to help you make this a reality in your own life. This process is an action program that will equip you with the best tools out there to process trauma, grief, and loss. And as you move through the program, you'll experience gradual healing as you complete each step. It's every week builds on itself. It's really amazing. It isn't just a course or information on how things should work. It's very experiential. Like you will experience huge shifts each week. So as you change and you grow, you will discover greater clarity than you've ever had. We always say that one of the biggest gifts that you get as a result is clarity in the moment. And
Yeah.
that's just huge because triggers can cause us to feel overwhelmed. They can lead to angry outbursts, resentment, shutting down, going to things like drugs, alcohol, or food. Even our body will subconsciously react with illnesses. Our bodies will literally override when you are not processing emotions, and it will fester inside. And you can get things like migraines, different, even just exhaustion, different physical ailments will come up. And they're no longer going to have the same effect on you when you are able to process. And so we want to take the next few minutes just to show you how you can experience this.
Yeah. And so when you really kind of think for a minute about what's at stake, you know, your relationships with your children, your spouse, just your general happiness, your future, and especially your children's future, you start to see how valuable this program really is. I mean, you could spend several years, thousands of dollars on either therapy or self-help books and programs, and not that those are necessarily bad things, but you still wouldn't necessarily experience the transformation that's possible with this method because the real world value of this program is so massive, and we just want you to experience that for yourself. So just again, kind of as a thought experiment, we're going to do a few of these, but think for a moment about what it would be worth to you to avoid years of unnecessary struggle and heartache. I mean, after all, there's no way that any of us can put a price on a healthy, connected relationships with our kids or with our spouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think a minute about the relationships that hold pain for you, think about the relationships that you wish could be better or at least different than what they are right now. Think about what it would feel like to show up differently at home with the people that mean the most to you. What would it feel like to be fully engaged in your life? And let that sink in because it is absolutely possible. It's possible to shift even in situations that feel not possible,
Yeah.
even in those. And we know that we can only change ourselves. And when we do this emotionally healing work, it goes out and it transforms every relationship. And like we were saying earlier, starting with the one with you, that's usually where it, it, there's so much healing that you don't even realize that needs to happen in that area.
Yeah. And I just, if you'll indulge me for a second, I just wanted to share a little bit more about my own experience as it relates to this area. I mean, we don't tell any story about our own, right? But I believe that my story can kind of help you see what's possible for yourself. So I mentioned, you know, the background of my relationship with my dad and how that was transformed. But in my relationship with Landry, you know, before I did GR and we were pregnant, it was not good news for me. That was actually a really, really challenging moment because all I could think of, because of the damage from my relationship with my dad, is great. I suck as a human being, I suck as a man, and now I get to suck as a dad. Awesome. Can't wait for that. That's going to be great. And that's where I was. And so finding out that I'm pregnant, that we're pregnant, yeah, me pregnant would be a shock. No, but finding out that Vicky was pregnant was not the good news that it should have been, and it crushed her. It crushed her. You know, this could have been like this happy memory that we have in our photo album. Instead, it's like this painful memory that we had to work through and process through. And so finding that out just brought all of the insecurity up and all of the fears. So I'm just stewing in this for 9 months, just all of this insecurity and fear. And it literally wasn't until the moment my daughter was born and I was holding in my arms and I was looking at her, I'm like, okay, if I have to walk across broken glass barefoot, I will do whatever it takes so that I can show up and be the dad she needs me to be. I don't care what it is. Now, I didn't know about GR in that moment. I would later discover it. And then once I did, I saw this is the tool that I need. This is the tool that I need to process my stuff so that my daughter won't have to. And so, I remember it was interesting. This is probably about a year or so ago now. I was having a conversation with Landry, and she asked me, like, well, what was like the worst thing that happened, in my childhood? And I thought about, for me, the worst moment as a dad. She was about 4 or 5 years old, and we were going into Target, and we were in the parking lot. I was not in a good space. I was kind of a lot going on in my mind at the time, and she kept asking me these questions. It was kind of whiny, and finally, I just turned around and snapped, and I leaned down and I got in her face, and you just shut your mouth right now. I don't want to hear one more question out of you. And as soon as the words left my mouth, I just saw her shrink. And then tears welled up and she was crying. And I instantly had just this enormous wave of regret wash over me. And I had to take a minute to kind of like process this. And then a few minutes later, before we got in the store, I got down in front of her again and I said, Landry, I am so sorry that I spoke to you that way. That was so wrong of me. That was so unkind. And I am so sorry and I apologize to you. Please forgive me. I promise I will do better. And she just sort of, the tears were still brimming, but then she just threw her arms around me and said, that's okay, Daddy, I forgive you. And it was awesome. And here's the cool thing. When I brought that up to my daughter, she didn't even remember it ever happened. That's like my worst moment as a parent, and she doesn't even remember it. And that was because I had the space and the time to work through my stuff so that when I made a mistake, because every parent makes mistakes, but when I made a mistake, I was able to, in the moment, own it. So it didn't become this gaping wound that my daughter had to sometime later recover from because I dealt with it when it happened. I dealt with it in that moment. And so it didn't carry forward. It didn't become part of a childhood that she had to recover from. She didn't even remember it. And that's really the power. This is why we are so passionate about what it can do in your own relationship and also in your relationship with your children. And so this is amazing because she's almost 20. She invites us into our world. We don't have to insert ourselves. We don't have to leverage things. We don't have to kind of manipulate we are welcome into her life. We are welcome to give her input and advice. And there's no greater joy than when your child actually wants to hear what you think about something and actually takes it seriously. It's amazing. It's a gift. And that's one of the greatest gifts that I experienced as a man and then as a father in this process.
Yeah, very, very valuable. Very different than our upbringing. Very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the process of grief recovery it's an 8-week program. We do a 30-minute consult. If you have never done grief recovery, we would love to connect with you. We can do a consult on the phone. We can do a Zoom call. It's a value of $100. We want to throw in a a consultation call. You get 8 weeks of 90-minute Zoom calls. We meet once a week. And this is a time we totally accommodate your schedule, whatever works for you. We are available during the week in between. Sometimes things come up in between our calls. We're completely accessible, very available. So we have ongoing support and tools. The whole process is $1,200 plus the call, so the value is $1,300. $100. And we are excited because we do have a special offer for everyone on this webinar that we will tell you about in a minute.
Yes. And so try this thought experiment now. So if you really just think about this, if all this process did for you was help you to finally break free from the guilt, the shame, the frustration of not knowing how to help your children, wouldn't it be worth it? Or if all this did was help you heal the unresolved grief that's been holding you back from showing up as the parent and the person that you've always wanted to be, wouldn't it be worth it? If all this did was equip you with the tools to create a home where your kids felt safe, connected, and emotionally grounded, wouldn't it be worth it?
Yeah.
Imagine what your life could be like if you healed those wounds and experienced the kind of transformation in your relationships that you want in your marriage and with your kids. Like we said, this is the good news is this isn't like a pie in the sky. Yeah, wouldn't that be great? You don't have to imagine this because grief recovery will do this for you and so much more. Now, let's go a step further. Take a moment to consider the cost of staying exactly where you are right now. Consider what it's costing you to continue to struggle with self-sabotage, damaged relationships, and unresolved grief. What we're talking about here is an investment in you, and you need to believe that you are totally worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the special offer that we have for anyone who's ready to take the next step is we are offering $100 off the 8-week program, normally $1,200, and the consultation call is totally free. And we have 30 minutes. We can even be on longer if we need to. And it can be with either Dan or myself. We have a link that you can check either one. And we do this private consultation call. And this is where we really create a roadmap for you. I love the program is 7 weeks. And so we do this intensive, it's an incredible program. And then the 8th week is a follow-up coaching call where we meet you where you are. Okay, this is where you are. The relationships in your life. Are you married? Are you a parent? Are like everybody comes in a different time and we can work with anybody. And so we want to coach you in how to use the tools moving forward in your life and also guide you if there's more work to do. We have alumni programs like Dan mentioned. If you are here and you've done alumni work, please reach out because we always encourage you to do more of the grief recovery work and we can come alongside you to do that. I feel like sometimes our hearts are kind of like an artichoke and our hearts can be surrounded by those prickly little leaves and we're peeling that back kind of to reveal the heart that's protected because of life, because of loss, because of things that you've gone through. And so we want to really help you in your life to use these tools. I use these tools in so many areas, and I can't tell you that I think the biggest area for me growing up, I grew up in an alcoholic home, and I was like half codependent, half alcoholic. Like I didn't know what a boundary was. I was the biggest people pleaser. I didn't want people mad at me. Like, and even after getting sober, which I've been sober now 30 something years, I have to do the math, but the people pleasing is a deep root. It's a deep root that kind of avoiding of conflict. And man, when it comes up, I can feel it in my body. Like I can feel it in my chest. It's hard to breathe. It affects me in that way. And I'm amazed at how now I can be aware and know I have tools that help me process so that I can be present. I have boundaries. I can speak up. I'm not going to live that way. It's a horrible example for my daughter, first of all. And it's not a good way to live. It's a terrible way to live. And so I can tell you honestly, like the work that we do, and that's the part that I love is let's learn these tools. And then the coaching that we can do is really amazing. So the cost and what we want to offer for you for being here for our price for being on this webinar with us is $1,100, which is a savings of $200. We work out payments. I haven't even really done the math to figure out, but weekly, I can guarantee you that this is going to be more powerful than most every other therapy and it works really well along with therapy. But what we do in that short amount of time is worth every penny, I promise you. So our consultation calls, by the way, are no pressure at all. No pressure. Our biggest concern is your healing. And so set up a call. Even if you're not sure if this is your time, that's okay. We would love to hear your story. We would love to help you see if grief recovery is a fit for you and how we can come alongside you and make that work.
Yeah. And so these are, these are some of the concerns that people have shared with us. Like we've been doing this for a while. Vicky's been doing this for more than 20 years. I mean, these are, concerns people have. And so you might have some of these concerns. So we just thought it might be helpful to kind of talk through them and address them. One of them that we hear is, I'm not sure if this will work for me. And that makes sense. You may have tried other things and haven't really felt like they have worked, or maybe they kind of work, but not the way that you wanted to. I can tell you, everyone that we have worked with who's fully committed and completed the grief recovery method has experienced transformation. It's something that I have experienced in my own life. It's something that I've seen in the lives of my clients. It's something that Vicky has experienced in her own life, and it's something she has seen in the lives of her clients over 20 plus years. So it's a fair question, but I think it's important to know that yes, this is different. Another question that we get is, how is this going to help my kid? Well, that's a really good question because it is about the kids, right? But in order for it to be about the kids, it's got to first be about you. I mean, we already know, look, no matter how much you love your kids, you can't give them something you don't have. No matter how much you love your kids, you can't lead them somewhere that you haven't been. And so that means that whatever we don't deal with in our own lives, our kids will. But on the other side of this process, you can absolutely show up differently with your children, which will transform your connection with them. Another question we get is, I've tried everything. And again, this is a little bit related to the first one. And again, this makes sense. It's like, it's exhausting. You're dealing with something that's very intense emotionally, and you're just like, oh, please tell me this works. Please tell me this is going to make a difference. Please. All I can tell you is it does. It is different because it's not behavior modification. It's not like talking through and just getting clarity and understanding, but not experiencing healing. It goes deeper. You're actually doing things that rewire your thinking at an emotional and neurological level. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to do things and process things differently. What has been learned can be unlearned, and good things can be relearned. That's amazing. Nothing's fixed or set in stone. Another question that we get is, or concern is, it's too expensive. And I get it. It's definitely not free. That's for sure. But like we talked about earlier, think through, what is it costing you to stay the same? The same today, the same this week, the same next month, the same next year and years after that. I mean, can you think of anything worth more than your kids? And ultimately, this investment in you is actually an investment in your family and ultimately in your legacy with your family. Another concern we get is, I'm afraid to deal with my grief. Well, again, it makes total sense. This is not, I'm never going to try to sell this like, oh no, it's actually really fun. It's not. This is not, we're not talking about fun. We're talking about transformation, right? And so I get it. It is not easy to step in because most of us, we've devoted a lot of time, energy, and even money into figuring out how not to feel stuff. We've gotten really sophisticated at it the older that we get. And so it's a lot to ask. So it makes sense that we'd be afraid to deal with this. But this is, yes, it can be a scary process, but it's also a process. We're in this with you. We're in this with you. We do this with you. This is not like, okay, well, do this stuff, good luck. I mean, we're in this, like I said, throughout the entire process. Another one that we often get is people will say, well, why bring up the past when I just want to move forward? Again, totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Most of us have learned to survive like I said earlier, by not feeling, by avoiding feeling. But the truth is, we don't move forward until we process our wounds, our grief, and our losses. In fact, if we don't process them, we stay exactly where we are. And that's rough.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really powerful one. And I think a lot of people even learn in therapy or like thinking about the stages of grief, which is a whole nother thing, that you should be moved on, you should be past this, which we do not ascribe to the stages of grief at all. You don't move on, you don't move past things, especially losses. But it's an interesting thing because you cannot move forward until you go back and until you heal that. Because what has happened is you've had losses, you've had things that have happened, and you've created workarounds. You've created ways to survive, to protect your heart. Maybe you focus on work. Maybe you focus on, like maybe you are distracted by things such as alcohol or ways that you've numbed out in order to keep going. But the thing about that is that part of you is going to fight going back and healing the root. And
Yeah.
so if that is coming up, it might be because there's a protective, like almost wall around your heart that is saying, hold on, we don't do that. Remember, we keep going, we keep moving forward, we keep pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. And you can't sustain that. You just can't. And if you are living with your heart guarded, you are not connecting to the people in your life. You are not having and experiencing true intimate connections. You can't. It
Yeah.
doesn't go both ways. You can't have a wall and just hold out some of it. It's just not possible. So we
Yeah.
want you to be able to show up differently with clarity, with peace, with discernment, with wisdom, all of those things in the moment.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. And it's daunting. It could be a little bit daunting, but once you get into it and once you see the tools, it's so possible. It really
Yeah.
and truly is so
Yeah.
possible. So the grief recovery method, just a little bit about it. It's like we said, it's a step-by-step program, and you're fully supported all the time. And everything that we ask you to do, we've done, and we do it with you. We even go first when we're working with someone. You'll be amazed at how much transformation happens in 8 weeks. The only source that we use is the Grief Recovery Handbook. And the story behind grief recovery is amazing. There was a gentleman named John James who created it, started grief recovery over 40 years ago. It started for him when he lost a son at 3 days old. His wife, they had a baby boy, and he died on his 3rd day of life. And he was devastated. And he had gone to Vietnam. He had lost so many friends. He came home and lost his younger brother. He had gone through so much loss, and he didn't understand why he wasn't able to process this. He's like, I've processed through all these things, but grief is accumulative. And pretty soon what happens is we just do not have the capacity. It's like, I think of being held somewhere underwater where you have this much room to breathe, and the water just keeps coming up, coming up, coming up, and you just are trying to just breathe. And so the program was created by John, who found something to help his heart because he couldn't find anything out there that spoke to his grief and spoke to his pain. And he created the grief recovery method. And I think about it now, and he was so ahead of his time. He passed away a few years ago, which was really sad. And all of us in the grief recovery family, it was very sad. But his legacy that he left, he was so ahead of his time with now all these NLP, all these ways of neurolinguistic programming and reprogramming. And that's exactly what we do. That's what this process really, really helps you to do. So our resource is the Grief Recovery Handbook. That's what we do. It's more than 40 years of research, and we consider it, and it's considered all over the world, honestly, as the gold standard for recovery in these areas. It's in, I think, 8 different languages, actually. And there's people like us that help people go through it all over the world. It's really incredible. I've been able to actually watch it really grow because I think I've been certified since 2003, and man, it's been amazing to watch it just grow and expand. So powerful.
Yeah. And so we really think that the time to act is really now for all the reasons that we've been talking about. We don't think you should wait another day to start your journey in transformation. This is it's really a powerful opportunity to change your life for the better. And so starting now is the perfect time to get emotionally complete prior to the holidays, which usually bring up a lot for people. And you honestly will be amazed at how different this holiday season can be with a new skill set to help you thrive in every area of your life. And so we encourage you to take the first step, book your consultation call, and we are ready to just come alongside you. One of my favorite quotes is from James R. Sherman, and he said, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." Because you don't have to continue on the course, that you're on. You can course correct. That's absolutely possible. And so if you're ready, the next step is just book a consultation call with either Vicky or myself. Our Calendly links will be posted in this chat, and also keep an eye on your inbox for your free ebook as our way of thanking you for being on this webinar with us. And that email will also have our Calendly links that you can book a consultation call with either Vicky or myself. So if you have any questions, we will stay on until every question is answered. I just want to say one final thing though, and this is important. On one hand, yes, I absolutely believe it's an amazing process. It will create amazing transformation. I've experienced it. Vicky's experienced it. It's something that I've seen with my own eyes, and I stand fully behind it. I fully encourage everybody to do it. Absolutely. But here's the thing. Only if you are ready. If someone is kind of leveraging you into it, if someone is kind of, well, you should really do this kind of a thing, and trying to kind of almost bully you into it, or if in other words, if there is any reason other than you just see this as something you need to do for you, don't do it. Because the only path forward into transformation is when you are intentional, and when you are committed, and when you are doing it for no other person than yourself. It has to be for you, or it's not the time. I would say then hold off, and wait. Your time will come. You'll be ready for it, but maybe now is not the time, because if there's any coercion involved at all, it has to be for you. It has to be something that you invest in and believe in for you, and not because someone else is trying to,
Yeah.
push you into it. So if you have any questions, like I said, we will be happy to stay on until every single question is answered. And if you have any, please, throw them out there, and we will take care of them. If you have anything that you're wondering about the program or about anything, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for hanging with us and being here. We very much value you. Any questions? And it could be about the process. It could even be a personal situation that you're going through. We're so happy to chat. I know it can kind of feel, oh, I'm on the spot.
I wanted to ask Dan a question.
Mhm.
Dan, do in terms of being adopted, I've read some articles on that being a real source of grief for a lot of kids. Is that something that you had to process as well?
Yeah, where it came out for me was, you know, obviously, my mom had me, so that was great. But there's also that thing that lurks inside of you but at the end of the day, I was not wanted enough to be kept by her. Now, obviously, I've reconnected with my mom, by the way, and we have a great
Yeah.
relationship. And there were totally reasons, and they totally make sense, but the emotional experience of it was feeling undesired. And so for me, that's something that I, spent years like constantly trying to figure out ways to get people to like me. It wasn't so much from people pleasing, it was just wanting to reaffirm that I was likable, that I was desirable, that, I had something going for me. So like, for example, when I was in middle school, I lied about everything because I wanted to sound cool. I wanted to sound like interesting. I wanted people to want to be like, "Ooh, wow, you did," and be impressed and so forth. And so that that led to its own thing. And then as I got older and as a young man, then I sought that from women, and it was constantly wanting to be desired by them. And so that led to a whole terrible string of behaviors. So yeah, it definitely played a role in, kind of my mindset and how I looked at things. And that was something that, through GR, I was ultimately able to kind of heal through and get to the other side of. But yeah, that was a thing for sure.
Yeah, I even want to, I'm like my hand up. Oh, I wanted to share on that as well because it was quite a journey finding his birth mom. And I think what was so amazing about that process is that he had done so much grief recovery work that he was totally at peace with her and at peace with the process. He had processed through it. When he met her, he was just so excited to meet her. And it was really intense because we found her. It's an incredible story. Landry actually got ancestry for his birthday because he really didn't he wasn't actively looking, and Landry really wanted him to. So we found her and he wrote her a letter, which is what he was encouraged to do, and gave her our number and everything. And so when she called, actually before she called, she had to tell her daughters because she had two daughters and they didn't know that she had had a son that she had put up for adoption. So she had to tell them. And
Mm.
he's like 6 years older, I think, and then maybe 5 years. And then she had two girls. She got married and had two girls. And so she had to tell them. And so when she called, one of them was actually there and they wouldn't let us all meet until they were all there. And it was amazing because the one daughter who just got baptized last weekend, actually, she told us that she was so mad at her mom. Like, how did you not tell us that we had a brother? And his mom said, I knew that you would find him, and I was petrified at the thought that he wouldn't want to know me, that he wouldn't
Mm.
want to know who I was. He wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. And I remember I can imagine that would be a fear on both sides. I mean,
Sure.
I would say that
Yeah.
many times. I mean, I remember bringing it up on our honeymoon, like, "Oh, we need to find your mom." Like, of course we do. And he was like, nah, no, you've kind of been rejected once and you don't need to go through that again. And so it was a huge process. And I know people that have found adopted parents and it hasn't
Mm.
No.
gone well because
Right.
there's so much hurt and you're looking for that to fill something. And Dan had done so much healing that he could just, and we have a little video of when we walked up to her house that day and he walked up carrying flowers, and it makes me cry every time. But we were walking up and she was standing in the door, like watched us pull up, and it was really, I mean, I'll never forget it. It was so powerful. Yeah. And now we try to see them about 4 times a year. They live about 4 hours away, but I really believe that it could have gone a different way if he had not have done the healing work that he had,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what a lot of grief for her. I mean, and
It
it's such an old grief for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, his
Mhm.
sisters have said she's different now. And what's so amazing is I feel like even from a spiritual level, there can be an orphan spirit. I mean, you don't have to be adopted to have an orphan spirit where you don't feel like you belong anywhere, you don't fit in, you don't, all those things. And I feel like when you have that, you're going to stay orphaned in your mind. Even if someone did show up, you're not really going to be able to receive the love and connection because there's a deep rooted belief that you're not worth it, that you're
Yeah,
not.
I can totally relate to that. Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
even if they showed up, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
he didn't get healed from that by meeting her. He got
Right.
healed first. And that's what
Yeah.
opened up the door. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, we moved to Texas from California. She had moved to Texas from Florida, like the year before we did. And when we
Wow.
found her, she lived an hour and a half away from us in the whole
Yeah.
world. In the whole world. We were like, what? Yeah,
Yeah.
it was crazy. But great
Yeah.
question, Jana. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it's very magnetic when we do those internal changes. It's like there's something magnetic within us that draws new things in. And the same way is like if we have that orphan spirit, it pushes things away.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. You can't receive it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
going
that
to
makes
be
a lot of
right.
sense.
Yeah,
Hmm.
right. It's so powerful. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
it's awesome. Yeah.
So, I mean, at the core of it, is it, is it removing false beliefs? Is it stripping ourselves of these false beliefs? And I mean, you guys did say there was 3 steps, but you never said what those 3 steps were. Can you share those, or is that something you don't want to
Yes.
share?
Sure.
No,
I can
yeah.
actually take you back.
I
I'll
thought
go
I
back
did.
to the,
Yes. So, yeah, can you find that slide? Yeah. So if you go back, the 3 steps that we do in the process is you have to
so you're going to
identify.
identify your
Oh, go
own
ahead.
grief and loss. Like you're going to, and again, that sounds sometimes self-evident, but a lot of times people don't realize. I mean, like I remember talking to somebody and they're like, well, it's like I don't really haven't had that much grief and loss. Like, I mean, like both my parents died, but they're older and like I had a brother die. I mean, but that happens, and so, there was like a couple of friends from high school that, they committed suicide, but people's lives get. And he's like talking like, dude, how many people do you know that have died? I mean, my gosh, and he was just, like your normal becomes your normal.
Right, right.
And
Yeah, and it's called
so
denial. I mean, we
yeah,
really
so
do
so
live in a
this first step,
society.
it seems kind of a little bit obvious, but it's actually sometimes a little bit more difficult than you'd think because you have to go back and look at your own life and realize these things that you might have minimized or ignored actually were losses,
Mm,
you know? And then
yeah,
the second step is, going through this process of healing your emotional wounds, right? And that's what the GR process does. And then step 3 is building healthier connections with your children because you're showing up differently. We have these triggers, right? Somebody says something and it's a reaction. It's not even something we think about. We react because it's a
right.
trigger. And so then there's a connection, we react, and then things go bad because we're responding out of this wound that's connected to this and this and this and this and this in my past. I'm not even in my present when I'm reacting. I'm reacting in my past. And so part of this brings you into the present. And again, this doesn't mean that you'll never have a bad response again. It means that you have space to respond differently. You're
Right.
not you're not connected to this trigger that sparks an immediate reaction. Now it's just simply a response in the moment. You have a choice to decide how you want to respond to this. You might still respond poorly, like habits are another separate thing, but at least now there's space to do something differently. Whereas before it was just trigger, reaction, and it's all
Right.
connected to the past. Well, when those links to the past are cut, now you're able to respond to whatever's going on in the moment rather than respond out of your past. And that's what step 3 is. That's how you're building healthier connections with your children.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Which
And
probably dissolves a lot of blame.
oh my gosh.
Because,
Right.
if you're in reaction, you're in blame. It's like, oh, you did that and this made me feel this way and therefore I'm this way. But
Yeah,
it
Right.
goes further back into the wound.
Like
it
with my
does.
daughter, right? When I snapped and I got in her face and I yelled at her, I mean, that was like I was mad in that moment, but then I had space to respond differently. And then I was able to use that space to own what I had said and to apologize.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and that's what, makes the difference in our communication. And so when I would make mistakes, I would apologize. I would own them because I
Mhm.
had that space created for me to respond differently. So even if I didn't respond the right way in the moment, I could at least respond,
Yeah.
later on with an apology and asking for forgiveness.
Yeah.
So true. And Jana, something that you said too is that blaming is that when you hold someone else responsible for your feelings, you
Right.
have no power. You have
Right. It's giving
given
your
away
power
all your
away.
power. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so that's there's such a shift that happens. And one thing that we always say is one of the definitions of unresolved grief, because grief is going to happen and we're all going to experience grief. We live in a fallen world and we are going to experience loss. But
Right.
when we say unresolved grief, because we want to learn to process it and resolve it, unresolved grief is conflicting feelings caused by the end of a familiar pattern of behavior. So that,
Would you say that again?
yes, absolutely. I'll try to say it slow. It's unresolved grief is conflicting feelings caused by the end of a familiar pattern of behavior. I should probably write that in the in the thing. It's worth it because it's so important to kind of know. I remember I was one of those people when um my parents were getting divorced. I was so sick. I got adult onset asthma. I couldn't breathe. I was still working. I was still because I'm like, go, I'll just keep going. And I was undiagnosed, so I was barely breathing. And I remember somebody telling me about this, and I was like, "Oh, I don't need grief recovery. That's the last thing I need." And I was like, I don't have a lot of grief in my life because I really thought grief meant death. And, and I would think, Dan, like he really needs that. He's had a lot. I haven't had a lot. And when I heard that, because she asked me, my friend asked me come to a meeting and you'll learn about what it is. So we actually hosted the meeting. So it was at my house. So I had to be there. And but I heard that unresolved grief is undelivered. Well, actually that's a different one. Unresolved grief is conflicting feelings caused by the end of a familiar pattern of behavior. And that's when I was like, I have been grieving my whole life. I've been grieving since I was about 14, maybe 12. And in all the ways that I was covering it up, the ways I was started drinking at 14, like I started using things. And so that just created a whole, and even in the therapy that I did, we never dealt with any of that. We dealt with we dealt with the behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Totally get it.
so, yeah. And so there was such an amazing thing when I went, wow, conflicting feelings. You can't even put words to that. What is that? I feel scared, feel happy, I feel weird, I feel confused, I feel like it's like a jumble. It's confusing.
Mm.
It's conflicting feelings. It's a perfect definition of what grief
Mhm.
is. And it's the end of a familiar pattern. Moving, leaving a job, your kids move out, retiring. I mean, there's all kinds of, it could even be, I remember when we sold our last car, I cried. I loved that car. I was watching it down the street. I was like, man, and I taught Landry how to drive in that car, like all the things
Yeah.
that you don't even think about it, but you realize, you know what, I'm letting that go. And I can actually honor that. I can actually honor that. Wow, that actually played a role in our life. And it's a new season, but we fully believe that when you have these tools and you use them to get complete with what you are leaving behind, then you can move forward fully and embrace where you're going next, the
Mm.
next season that you're going into.
I have another question, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're dealing with someone who is highly intellectual and like intellectualizes all these things, how do you help them, in terms of like, like you said, sometimes in therapy, it's like, they don't even bring up certain things or whatever. But, in our society, I feel like there's a lot of, I mean, obviously, I'm a super emotional person, always have been, and, as an artistic type person, but really didn't learn how to process. I could feel my feelings and still not process them.
Mm.
Definitely.
So I guess there's two things, feeling feelings and not processing them, or just somebody who intellectualizes their feelings and can't feel.
Yes, very, very much so. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we talk about it a lot because most of our coping skills. We call them skills, actually. They appeal to the intellect. We're taught to intellectualize our emotions in order to survive.
Right.
That we talk about this in the first class. We talk about myths, and we talk about ways that we've been minimized, compared, judged, all of these things. And so we learn to process our emotions through that lens. I've got to do this in order to act like everything's okay, in order to fit in order to not be judged, all those
Right.
things. So I think there's a grooming that's happening. If you're an emotional person, there's a grooming of learning to mature and learning how to process. If you're really intellectual and it's hard for you to connect to feelings, something's popping into my mind right now. So there was a gentleman that I was working with a couple years ago, and he had 2 teen daughters, and he had this garage that was impeccable. And he would just sort of retire to the garage. That was like his man cave. And there was a lot going on in his marriage and a lot going on his daughters, but he would sort of just disengage. And his wife was sort of like, I can't do this anymore. You're not engaged in our life. You just go find your safe space. And he came in because he was like, I want to know, like, I want to figure this out. And it turned out that he grew up in a very abusive, his parents were very abusive to each other. They fought a lot. And he would go in his room and create this very safe, very organized room that gave him safety. And so now, as he was an adult man, he found his place where things had a place and it made him feel safe. And
Yeah.
I can live here. And he had no idea how to engage with all the emotion going on in that house. And so what was amazing is, as he processed and had emotion about his growing up and what was happening in his home, on the other side of that was ability to be clear, the ability to be present. It was amazing to
Yeah.
see. And I use that as an example. I think stories are sometimes, like, hearing someone's experience sometimes can illustrate it better than even explaining it. But I remember just being like, wow, this is such an incredible process. And there was a lot of emotion under there that he was able to process. And so I believe there's a grooming. It's almost like I wish this was taught in school, but probably when we're in high school, we're not ready to do this. But to groom, how do we process emotions?
Yeah.
Because you're
It'd
gonna
be great if we learned it from the get-go, right? If we learned it as children.
And then
Well,
your parents are different temperaments, and you're all the kids in your household. You might have a sister or a brother, and you guys are different temperaments, and you grew up in the same house, and you have totally different experiences. It's like
Yeah,
it's
right.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but that's
yeah,
why
and I think the big problem is that people, it's like you think that somehow you're going to think your way through your emotional problems.
Right, right.
It's just not going to happen. Like, you will never heal your heart with your head.
Right.
So, people will do that, and it's kind of like, that's why clarity isn't the same as healing. It would be like, the example I like to use is like, if you went to the dentist and you got a high definition 4K 3D image of the cavity that you have, but then he sent you home. It's like, well, thanks. I've got this really super high definition, clear picture of my problem, but you did not give me a solution.
Right.
So the clarity doesn't do any good. It just really, 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 really well defines the problem.
Yeah. And it just, I guess what it reminds me of is, like, we get disconnected from these hurt parts of ourselves when we're young.
Yep.
And I mean, for me, I think it actually created a self-hatred for those parts.
Sure.
Like, I felt like I wasn't allowed to be weak. And so in my mind, as a young person, I hated weakness. I hated it. I hated it in myself, and it created that false, like, strong woman, hear me roar. But
Right.
really, it was such a wounded, child
Mhm.
behind that facade.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And we
Yeah.
always say there's no bad parts. There are no bad parts to you. There are just
Right.
parts we're creating.
Right. Yeah. But I can see how we do hate those things because they weren't accepted by the caregiver. All those things were like sent to your room and told to get away, get out of here. I don't want to hear your belly aching. So
Yeah.
Right.
all those things then create this shut off, of ourselves, and we do it internally. Not just it happens in a
Sure other people get
external way, but an internal way. My husband's asking me to be quiet because I talked to my
share things. They need to share.
No, I know. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
don't rat me out.
I know. We appreciate her questions. These are
I guess
great.
I'm jealous because I wanted to jump in, but I'm also feeling like we should let some other people share. So maybe can you get back to me just so I can comment on a couple of things that I've said? I'm sorry, that you've said. And let me just say congratulations on this great work. It's really great to see you guys. I would like to have another word, but please let some other people share if they want to.
I think it's fine unless I don't
Yeah.
see any hands or anything. So Kenny, we'd love to hear what you want to.
I just want, okay, oh, well, thanks. I just want to make sure. I've been in recovery for in S programs for years now. So I'm always mindful of like, am I sharing too long? So that's just my own insecurity. But let me digress and just say it's really great seeing you both. It's been a lot of years. And
Yeah.
Vicki, I've been following you on Facebook, so I know you've been doing this work for a long time, and I've commented a couple times. And I feel like I've been doing a lot of this work that you're talking about through the 12 steps and through S programs for a while now. So a lot of this language is familiar to me. I just think it's great work. I love the way you guys speak. I love the material. And yeah, I love the whole parts work. I love a couple of things that Dan said. Something that really stood out is just if you want something you've never had, you need to do things you've never done. And that really challenged me. Because I find even my own recovery work, there's a lot of things that I'm not willing to push or, I still feel stagnant in certain areas. And I'm certainly grieving. And that goes back from past trauma, my own past traumas,
Sure.
and parts work, you know what I mean? So Jen and I are gonna really kind of look at this stuff, but I'm really excited for you guys' work, and we're gonna see how this fits for us. And I just want to close with saying it's really great seeing you guys. And I also heard something you guys were talking about a couple days ago, a little bit in regards to some spiritual work that you guys have been doing and teaching on. And I really loved it. So I hope to talk to you guys more about that. So, and I'll
Okay.
pass with that.
All right. Yeah, we love that. Thanks, Kenny.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kenny. It is
Yeah,
awesome to see you guys.
it really is.
It really is. It's really, really awesome. Yeah, we're so happy that you're here. Definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else have any questions? Sean, I think you do.
Oh, I was just going to comment since, well, I wasn't going to. I think this is the longest you've spent time with me in a session, Vicki, and not heard me speak because I tend to go on and on. But yeah, I actually had just a point of sharing. I had a friend that sent me actually a link to a webinar, and I've been working with Vicki for, I think it's going on the 6th or 7th week. And yeah, when I saw this thing tied into connecting with the kids, that was something where I was just hopping on and getting the tidbits because, as we've discussed, I thought maybe you queued up the other couple that I was here to, and they asked about the intellectual question because I try and like mentally process the whole thing. But no, it was good to sit here and listen to you guys. And yeah, I'm actually like right in the midst of the first round, and it's been really cool to do. So it was one of those things, even on a Monday night, I thought I'd hop on for another hour just to be in this kind of headspace. So appreciate you guys.
That's cool. We're so glad to have you, Sean.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And
It has
thanks
been
for
awesome.
yeah, humoring me outside by the fire pit. You know, the circumstance, I take what I can get when it's here. So
Yes, that is
Sean,
so.
are you up in Canada or where are you?
no, I'm actually in Iowa, but this week, I think it's 43 degrees right now. And
Okay.
I'm like kind of coddled, so I've got like more warmth than I probably need. But yeah, no, I live on 2 acres and it's like really wooded. So I have a fire pit and I sit out here at night. So
That's
I,
awesome.
yeah,
Nice.
just combined it. But yeah, no, it's not Canada. But if I sound Canadian, I was in a Green Bay for a Packers game this weekend. So I might have actually like,
You
Wow.
sound a little Canadian and
I'm a little,
I was in a,
yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say I'm a touch tickle in my throat, but yeah, who knows what accent I have now. Normally in Iowa we don't have one, but I feel like I sound funky, but that's all good.
What part of Iowa?
Right in the northeast in Cedar Falls, university town.
That's where our friend's
So,
from. That's where Tim's
all
from.
right.
Yeah.
Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, she's Des Moines, so 2
Oh,
hours
okay.
away, but yeah, no, that's I've actually watched a ton of the WNBA this year just to watch her. So
Yeah, so have
yeah,
we.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a small world.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's been awesome working with you, Sean. It's been
Yeah, and likewise. There's you have a way of making me feel comfortable.
Mm.
That's good. I'm glad. Our whole goal is emotional safety and helping people feel safe so that they can process. And it's
Yep.
really quite amazing how when you do, what we do is help you, like this says, identify your own grief and then give you that safe space to process it. So yeah, very, very powerful. Well, very awesome. Man, we could just hang out here and
I know.
hang out
Yeah.
and chat all night. So, but we're very grateful. And I know that there are a few people on here that don't have their camera on, and hopefully I'm sure that you registered to be here. So we will be sending out an email with a replay. It'll have the recording. And somebody had asked if they could share that. Absolutely. You can share the replay. We're actually going to start having it on our website. We're going to just start kind of putting them on there.
Yeah, like a
because-
library kind of.
Yeah, because each month we're going to do a different theme. And so I think next month for November, we're probably going to do a theme about the holidays and kind of how how we can see through that lens. And we want to help prepare people for the holidays. I think that's what we
Yeah,
might do.
because the holidays are always tricky, and they bring up like good and bad, and you also get to test the theory of relativity, which is that time moves more slowly when you're with your relatives. No, I'm kidding.
This is true.
I'm only kidding. No, it's really just a great time to meet together, hang out, and talk about how much we've disappointed our parents. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. It's not that at all. It's great.
You're 2 for 2.
Oh my gosh, that is too funny. Yeah, he's always full of them.
I'm
But
full
we
of
should
something. I don't know.
Yeah. So we will close it out. We want to definitely respect and honor your time.
Yes, thank you guys.
Thank you guys so much for being here. And
Thanks
we
for the
will
presentation.
thank you. Thank you
you
for
guys.
that. So appreciate it. And we'll definitely send you the email and look out we'll always keep you notified on what we'll be speaking on next month. And hopefully you could join us for that. But we will see you all soon. Have a beautiful and blessed night.
Good night,
Take
all.
care.
Thank you. Have
See
a
ya.
good night.